Welcome to the Politics and Media programme. Last week, the sentencing of 7 men involved in the Oxford child sex abuse ring coincided with an unprecedented coordinated reading of a sermon in mosques across the country condemning such crimes. The sermon has proved controversial and divisive. Some say it was a statement that the Muslim community needed to make to respond to the fact that some Muslims are involved in grooming networks. Critics of the sermon say that it gives the impression that child sex crime is a uniquely Muslim problem and that such statements are not required of other institutions whose members have committed the same crime. First, let's talk to the author of the sermon, Alyas Karmani, who's co-director of Street UK. Hello, Alyas. So why did you think that this was an unnecessary step to take?
Well, I think, this was not something that was foisted on the community. This was something that was done by choice. Many people chose to do this because they wanted to do this. And I think certain negative voices have actually almost bullied people to think otherwise. Now, the motivation is I've been involved in this work for a long period of time. This sermon was actually written many, many years ago. And others asked me to come and said, we want to also, can you share this with us so that we can actually talk about this issue? Because it is an issue which is a massive social issue that affects all society that we want to be proactive in talking about. In no way does this suggest, just because we talk about an issue, that this is a Muslim issue. In fact, the ones who have done that are the media. So what we can say is that, misconceptions about Islam and Muslims spread because Muslims behave contrary to Islam. So when they behave contrary to Islam, the media, because it's generally Islamophobic, will pick up on this and try to promote this as Muslim behavior. So therefore, we have and we didn't do this, we didn't start this. It's the media who promote this and have caused this to proliferate, this idea of Muslim sexual grooming. And when this occurs, then we have a role as the Muslim community to make things clear and to put the record straight. And I think what we did last Friday was actually unprecedented, and I think was a really positive move in that we set the record straight, that this has got nothing to do with Islam whatsoever. These are criminals who are motivated by criminal behavior, focus on the criminality, not on race, ethnicity, and faith. And I think once and for all, decisively, we've actually challenged that misconception so that hopefully the media is going to be much more, I think, measured in actually coming up with that in the future. And I think that's what really motivates this whole process. Because evil spreads and misconceptions spread when we remain quiet. I don't think we could take the approach of brushing this issue under.
But what do you think will happen then when political figures on the right say, there you go, they've apologised for it, nobody else has apologised for it, it must be a particular problem in this community?
And I think we were very measured in our statement, which was that this is not a Muslim issue. We as Muslims who are members of society are talking about a social issue that affects everybody, and we've got something to say on these issues. Because the Quran actually talks explicitly about child protection. So we've got something to say and something to contribute to the mainstream. The problem with the far right is already there, and the problem with the far right isn't to do with this project. It's to do with the fact that the media gives too much airtime and coverage to extremist elements, whether it's a far right or Muslim-inspired extremist groups, and they don't give any coverage to mainstream voices that are measured. So I think it's not, this is not something to do with us. And I think, if I give a final point, I'm in a Derby today. I'm working with practitioners involved in this particular area of work. All of them are saying that this was a really positive move. They really valued what the Muslim community had to say. So I think in terms of the mainstream non-Muslim audience out there, they've really welcomed this and they've been really positive about this. And the only voices that have been negative, I think, have been people who have profoundly misunderstood what this whole thing is about. This is not about apologising for anything. We don't have to apologise for anything. It is us being proactive and actually making our religion clear and making the Quran clear.
Okay, well, Alyas Karmani, who wrote last Friday's sermon. Joining me in the studio to discuss the issues are Julie Siddiqi from the Islamic Society of Britain, which has backed the anti-grooming initiative, and Asghar Bukhari, a founding member of the Muslim Public Affairs Committee UK. On the phone, we have Judge Khurshid Drabu, who's a special advisor at MINAB and also a founding member of the Muslim Council of Britain. Welcome to the programme, all of you. Julie, you think the statement was a good idea and that there's no danger that it'll play into the hands of the right and the media?
No, I mean, I think just to comment really and commend Alyas and others on the way they actually proactively went about this. As he's already said, it wasn't a reaction to anything. It was actually Muslims standing up, being proactive and actually being quite organised for a change, which I think is to be is to be commended. So I really do think that it's been a positive move. I think, as he said, people have either misunderstood or actually are deliberately trying to cause trouble after this event on Friday. I think in a way, some people actually spend their life talking about what's not happening in mosques and what we should be doing in mosques. And when people actually do something proactive as this on an issue that's actually very, very complex and very difficult, I think it should be commended. And I really do feel it's been much more positive than negative overall.
Next card. You don't agree with that point of view?
No, I don't, unsurprisingly. The mosques have been completely silent when it comes to Muslim demonisation, and the one time they get active is the one time they sell us out, the one time they blame us for the problem. It's all very well saying, we read a statement out and saying it's not a Muslim issue. The whole of the country was talking about Muslims and paedophilia or child sex grooming gangs. And then the mosques, 500 of them, release a statement saying that they're going to talk about it in their mosques, reinforcing the very narrative that we actually are to blame, that it's a Muslim issue. Instead of going out and saying, those 500 similar mosques could have read a statement out saying that we condemn the racism within the media that has allowed or that is claiming that we are involved in child sex scams and it's a Muslim issue. Why didn't they do that? Why were they so cowardly that they had to blame the Muslims instead of standing up for us?
OK, let me bring Judge Drabu in. What's your take on this? Was the sermon a mistake or not?
Yes. I've heard both speakers, and I have reservations about the initiative having been carried out in the manner that it was. It is not an Islamic issue, and unfortunately, I think the strategy that was used for a very good cause was slightly misguided, particularly after having had a chance to think about it and the chance to review the matter in hindsight. I think what we need to make sure is that issues such as this are debated and are, contributed to, but in a holistic way, not just as Muslims, as being citizens of this country. This is a problem that is rampant in other faiths as well, other nationalities as well, other ethnicities as well. So why should we take ownership of it simply because a few people have been convicted? And those people happen to be Muslims, those people happen to be of a certain ethnicity, but that doesn't make the whole issue racial or faith-based. It doesn't. In Roman Catholic churches, we have had pedophilia for a long time. That doesn't make all Roman Catholics pedophilic, and they deal with the issue very sensibly and intelligently. We in the Muslim community appear to be lacking in that intellect and in strategizing issues. As my brother for Ampac says quite rightly, we should actually be, joining hands to condemn racism and Islamophobia and make it clear from the mosques as well that this is something that we feel very strongly about. That is something that needs to be done. We also need to, talk about issues that affect all of us, not just Muslims. Domestic violence. It is an issue that you never hear from the pulpits, in the mosques, although it is an issue that is quite relevant to the Muslim society.
OK, thanks very much for that, Judge. Julie, I mean, there is a problem here, isn't there, about the atmosphere into which an initiative like this is launched. I mean, if it were a completely level playing field, you might say fair enough. But this is the one statement in mosques which gets high-rank billing on the mainstream news. Any other statement, the kind of statement that the judge was on about racism or Islamophobia, that wouldn't even feature on the mainstream news, but this does. So there's a failure to calculate the atmosphere, isn't there? Well,
I think in a way I'd really welcome if MCB, MINAB, MPAC and whoever else want to coordinate and do statements on any of these things. Brilliant, because I've never ever seen, it's unprecedented actually to be able to get mosques from different backgrounds talking about an issue.
It wouldn't make the news.
I'm not sure. I'm not sure about that. Look, let's get one thing clear. I was in Oxford on Friday doing another programme, and there were people in there from the local Oxford community, people in there from the local Pakistani Muslim Oxford community, who very clearly, categorically said on there, on more than one occasion, that people knew. There is no way, if you actually read the reports of what happened just in the Oxford case, forget Rochdale, forget Derby, forget Telford, just look at what's happened recently in Oxford, and rightly so, the men got life imprisonment in many cases. if you actually listen to the
Stuart
people in
Hall
Oxford,
didn't. Jimmy Savile, though.
if you just let me finish, if you actually listen to the people in Oxford and what they say about this issue, it gives us cause for a lot of reflection on what has and hasn't been done. I say, actually, as Muslims, we have something to offer. As Alyas said, no one is saying that this is an Islamic issue. No one is saying that these men did it in the name of Islam or as Muslims. Far from it.
Well,
what I am saying is that research. What I am saying is that research that's being done, the evidence is clear. The evidence is emerging. The evidence is saying that this particular model of grooming, not all child abuse, not all paedophiles, not all criminals are Muslim, of course not. But what the research is saying is this particular model of on-street gang grooming is being perpetrated by men of a similar background. That, for me, is something that we simply cannot ignore. This is not about apologising. No one is apologising. This is about standing up for something that is,
but maybe they
unjust.
Maybe they don't have the access to the green room at the BBC.
Who doesn't have access to the
people who are standing on street corners.
What do you mean? Sorry.
What I mean is, you say, look, this specific form, this particular way of being involved in child sex is peculiar to this group of people. And what I'm saying to you is, there's another group of people, Jimmy Savile.
Right, and how much coverage has the Jimmy Savile, the white... and everyone is talking about it.
The parallel isn't with the coverage. The parallel is whether the institution as a whole has apologised now. Now, I'm missing that.
Actually, I think there's been a lot of coverage on the BBC, the mistakes that have been made, and everybody's talking about it, and thank God they are. Look, we clearly have a problem in this country of child abuse, pornography, etc. in general, across the board. If you look at all of the reports that are coming out, from every background, victims and perpetrators from every part of the country. I'm talking about general child abuse.
Let me bring Asghar back in then. So, do you think that what's wrong here is not that there isn't a specific problem that should be addressed, but that there's a failure to calculate the political atmosphere into which it's...
Absolutely. There's lots of problems that Muslims have, right, and non-Muslims have. This particular one, however, was used as a demonisation tactic. They segmented it so that they split the cake, let's say, and only highlighted one part of the cake and said, look, that's the part that the Muslims are involved with. And instead of pushing back and saying, how dare you split the cake like that when 95% of child sex abuse cases are non-Muslim, right? Which is another segment.
Would you have been happy with this if other institutions had, if you like, bought into this project?
Look, if it's about tackling paedophilia, then who isn't in? If it's about demonising a community, the Muslim community, then count me out. What I'm saying is that the mosques and these institutions that seem to be backing it, anything the media want to demonise us on, whether it's terrorism or whether it's...
Yeah, what I'm saying, though, is do you think that if this project had been launched in a way which said, OK, there are a number of institutions in society that have had to confront this issue, if we can get a project where they all buy into this, then it won't look like demonising one section of the community.
If you're saying that if all members of society were trying to tackle paedophilia, then yes. If it's about, as I said, a certain community that is being demonised because of a part to play, then no, that's racism. And we played our part in reinforcing that racist narrative against us by saying in 500 mosques, when everyone was pointing the finger at us, saying, yes, we're guilty, we're talking to our community about it. The community don't need to go to the mosque and hear about why they're paedophiles. The community need to go to that mosque and hear that the racism that has demonised them so needs to be tackled, and how the mosque is going to organise a counter-attack against that racism, which they refused to do because they were too cowardly to do it.
Judge, let me bring you back into the conversation here. Do you think the project would have been better shaped if it had been something which involved institutions right across the width of the society?
That to be true at all. It would be a miracle if 100 mosques had this khutbah read throughout the country. We all have experience of how mosques work. I mean, this is an exaggerated claim, but what is more important is that we need to have better strategy for launching initiatives of this kind, being sensitive to the media's, Islamophobic bent of mind all the time. They will pick on these things. We are damned if we do, and we are damned if we don't. That is the tragedy that faces Muslims presently in this country. It was an initiative that needed to be taken on board, but we should have done it in association with other faith groups and other people, people with no faith at all, because this is an issue that affects the whole of the community, whole of the society, not just the Muslims.
Julie.
I find it actually quite disappointing and very surprising that we have somebody here from the Muslim Council of Britain and actually somebody who advises MINAB, both of whom actually backed and supported this campaign on Friday. So I'm finding that very difficult to understand. But aside from that, the one thing that's missing in all of this, as always, from the Muslim community, is any focus on the victims, any focus on this actual crime itself. These are some of the most horrific levels of child abuse you could ever possibly imagine. And I haven't heard any Muslims talk about that. We talk about people working together across society. I absolutely agree with that. And because of that, last month in May in Bradford, we actually launched something called CASE, Community Alliance Against Sexual Exploitation. Muslims taking the lead, working with others, Church of England, Sikh groups, victim support groups across the board. That, for me, is the right approach. This campaign on Friday was organised by a very, very small group of committed people based up north who felt, do you know what, we need to do something. Let's see how many mosques and how many imams we can get on board with it. Simple as that. People could say no if they wanted to, and indeed they did. Nobody was saying they were forced upon mosques. Nobody was saying that imams had to do it. Nobody is saying that the government somehow forced people to do it. It's a load of nonsense.
Which makes
Honestly,
it even worse.
We absolutely...
You demonise yourself by voting in, by saying, I'll do it.
Asghar, I'll come
Once
to you in
again,
a second.
Asghar doesn't know anything apart from butting in. What I would say is that actually the focus for me is going to be on the victims, on the families. I've met some of the families. I've met a girl recently last week who's actually been through this situation, and I would argue with anybody who actually felt that that didn't make it much more real. Those are the people we need to be focusing on, working across the board. We also need to be holding the authorities to account. The local authority in Oxford and the police failed. They failed the girls, they failed
but you didn't put
these
down
families.
your statement.
They failed these girls and they failed these families. And that needs to be questioned, and that's some of the other work that we're doing. Holding these local authorities to account to say, why have you not learnt the lessons from the previous cases? Why did you allow these girls to be failed at every level? I would also just like to add, for people, if they didn't know, was we have at least another 5, not 1, not 2, but 5 at least cases like Oxford in the books, in the courts right now as we speak. All of the men from the same background.
Let me put that point to Asghar then. Julie's point seems to be that anybody who has an objection to this particular political initiative and its effects must be, by definition, blind to the suffering of the victims. Do you think that's true?
What Julie
wasn't
can't
what I
understand...
said.
Well, it is what you said.
It comes across like that. What Julie seems to try to conflate is the fact that there are victims, and as a result, we should allow ourselves to be demonised or become Uncle Toms off the back of it. No, there are victims that have nothing to do with the racist backlash that we got. And what we're complaining about, or what many Muslims are complaining about, is that how dare she reinforce the racist backlash off the back of their victimhood. They've suffered, so now the whole community have to suffer a racist backlash. If you wanted to use that victim for racist propaganda, then be my guest, but I don't want to. What I'm saying is, if mosques, yes, I agree, mosques must do more, mosques, and we need to help these victims, but it's not a Muslim issue, and this particular publicity stunt aided the narrative against us that we are extremists, violent, barbaric, and now we're paedophiles as well. When are we going to tell our story? We are the most oppressed people in the world, a great people, that all we want in this country to live as equal citizens with some justice. When are we going to start to tell our story? Rather than tell theirs.
Judge, what do you think would have been a better approach to this question? You've been critical of what did happen, but what do you think should have happened?
I'm not being critical. It's not an easy issue to make judgments on. I mean, the points that Julie makes are perfectly valid, and so does Brother Bukhari. But I think the way that it was handled, especially by the media, and of which we should have been aware, we should have been more sensitive to that. We could have done it slightly differently. The statement could have taken account not only of the victims, which it didn't, but also of the failures of the society at large in making this happen, in standing back and not taking due care for people who are vulnerable in our society. I mean, that is something that needs to be investigated as forcefully as the fact that most of the people involved in these crimes happen to be Muslims. They don't do it in the name of Islam, as some of the heinous acts have been done in the past. So, for example, this murder of the soldier. It was a lunatic who did it. But nobody would accept, the media is loath to accept, that Muslims also can be mad. There are some Muslims who are mad. and they will engage in acts of violence, acts of criminality, acts of barbarism.
They're not mad. They're not mad. And this is the problem. We don't tell our story. All we want to do is reinforce their story. When it comes to terrorism, they're not mad. What they have is a political agenda. It was foreign policy, something that my colleague sitting next to me here refused to say on the media because she was following their narrative. Again, saying it's the victims that we should be considered about. And again, now it's paedophilia. Again, we're blaming ourselves. It's not our fault.
You can't interrupt each other, but I can interrupt you because I'm trying to get to both sides of the debate in here. Judy, what proportion of the relevant crimes are actually committed by Muslims?
Actually, the research is still coming through. So initially, the research that's been done by the Children's Commission, which came to the first half of it was in November, and the second half will be reported this November. And initially, the figures that were coming out are horrific just in general in this country on child abuse in general. As I said, across the board, all people from all backgrounds, victims from all people, all backgrounds, from all parts of the country. Sadly, it is a phenomena that none of us can choose to ignore. What is coming out, and what they are now saying, and what they will report on in November, is that this particular type of on-street gang grooming, which is what we're focusing on. Nobody is saying that we have all the answers.
Why are we focusing on that?
Asghar.
We have chosen to focus on one aspect of this, along with all the other work that we're trying to do. This particular type of on-street gang grooming is some of the most horrific child abuse you can ever imagine. Those men did not get life sentences for nothing. They were allowed to get away with this, not for 8 months, for not 8 weeks, 8 years. 8 years in a small area of Oxford, men who were part of a community. It's not to say that all the people in that community knew about it. I once again go back to the victims. These girls' lives have been ruined. And actually, I feel they're my daughters, my sisters. I have a 15-year-old daughter, and to think that those girls were made to feel that somehow being multiply raped or passed around numerous men on a regular basis was somehow normal.
Asghar, we're going to have to leave it there because we're running out of time there. So this debate, I'm sure, will continue both in the studio afterwards and in future editions of the Politics and Media programme. But do rejoin us for part 2 after the adverts.